Hey, Michelle is back with part 3, January 30th, 2026. Again, I'm not sure what I'm going to name these videos, but I wanted to put it out, and get the conversation in the right direction, okay? By starting with the basics. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm talking basics here. There's no need to be fearful of basic information, basic knowledge, okay? As far as biology is concerned, because now everybody's on the bandwagon talking about it, and there's a group of people that should have been talking about this at least 10 years or more ago, because they had this information about this particular topic and knew that this topic would be a hot topic. They should have jumped on top of it and help people to resolve it, help people to think through it clearly. But no, they were so busy building cults, CULTS, building their brand, attempting to make as much money as possible and promote themselves as know-it-alls. And they dropped they just dropped the ball. So now I notice I go, because I pay attention to this site. I pay attention to everybody, whether I like you or not. And now all of a sudden it's a topic. Okay, and then they bring out, what aliens are saying and all this bullshit. Hiding behind aliens. And when they say aliens, they mean people from other planets. They don't have the courage to speak it for themselves. It's basic. There's no harm in basic information. Okay, we make it so harmful for people to talk and ask questions. Instead, we have these so-called pseudo experts who think they know the answers and everybody needs to follow them and that they're on top of things because they know this topic is hot. It's a hot topic, talking about transgenders. Talking about transgenders right now is a hot topic. You know why? Because that community is a commodity. It's being used as a commodity. It's being used to supplement incomes. Actually, it's not actually supplementing income. Millions, maybe billions of people are creating a livelihood off of this community. And this community is helping it to happen because they're not understanding who they are, what they are, and why they are. Okay? So, part 3. So, when we left from part 2, I talked about femicide, the conveyor belt theory, the birth canal, and in vitro fertilization, and C-sections. Thankfully, when I told you when I get excited sometimes, or kind of worked up, my words get all, but I ain't re-recording nothing. How about that? I'm understood. I know that. I know I'm understood. Just look, just read between the lines and attempt to figure things out on your own. So where I left off at is the most healthiest way for a biological woman to give birth is through the birth canal. We know that. That's basic. Okay? But instead of recognizing that there was an issue when fertilization issues started popping up, no, that meant we needed to interfere. So the interference resulted in vitro fertilization. Okay. And then C-sections. Okay. We all know, and let's not be so immature. We all know that there's complications with everything. Okay. Sure. And test tube babies. Let's not forget those. All of this started to be introduced. Instead of attempting to understand, okay, why is it necessary to have test tube babies? Why is it necessary to have a C-section? Why is it necessary to have in vitro fertilization? That is not saying anything about that if anyone uses those particular type of procedures, that is necessarily bad or that is necessarily good. The question to ask is why? Okay, and with like I said, with the conveyor belt theory, if you are bringing down more and more and more that you can handle, that you can take care of, isn't that a red sign? Isn't that a red flag? So it was always perplexed. It was always crazy, and when they would force this particular type of agenda on us, indoctrination, they always focus on the continent of Africa. Remember, Africa is a continent. It's not a country. Think about that. They'll always focus on the continent of Africa and pick and choose areas to abuse, to manipulate, to deceive, and create income, create livelihoods. If you point out, okay, in this particular area, these people are starving. Okay, that happens the same way on the USA. There are particular areas here that are starving, malnourished. But no, let's go to Africa and pick one of those countries within a continent, which is billions of people, so that we don't focus on our own backyard. Did any of you know that we had a malnourished, impoverished, starving community in the USA? Well, supposedly it was in Detroit, Michigan. Do your research. But yet, no, nobody knew about that because we were focusing on what was happening in Africa. But it always was confusing to me why when they would force this type of indoctrination on us, begging for money to take care of these starving people, when we had starving people, and we still do in America in certain places. It's not the homeless. The homeless is not starving. Pay attention. They were usually young mothers with children. Why would a mother give birth when she knows that she cannot take care of the baby that she will produce because of the interference? Okay, they were indoctrinated just like all of us with this religious indoctrination that they're supposed to have these babies. They're supposed to produce these babies. And they didn't understand because of lack of self-education. They were forced not to learn anything from the men, usually, the biological men. They knew that that was illogical. If I can't feed myself, how can I feed my baby? Indoctrination, suppression, depression, and it was not just the continent of Africa and the indoctrination going on there, but it was the interference. And the interference came from the USA, Britain, Germany, and all of those other places. Do your research. So the question is not to dismiss the fact that, yes, we have babies that were born via in vitro fertilization, in vitro fertilization, C-sections, and test tube babies. And there's other procedures. But I told you the natural process was what? Via the biological woman's birth canal, which consisted of what? A cervix and a vagina. That is only applying to biological women. Now, a few decades ago, there was this country. I'll call it a country. You figure out, you can figure out whether it's a country or a continent, or city, state, town, village, whatever. But there was this country of biological men who thought they were, again, the owners of biological women. They control the livelihood and the life of the woman, the biological woman. They determine whether the biological woman lives or dies. And it's still that way. I'll get to that. So, what this particular country attempted to do, and this is all knowledge that was taught to us, by the way, and there's evidence to support it. Do your research. So, this particular country were involved in, all types of experiments, surgical procedures. They call it, it was some type of pseudoscience. But this particular country had enough knowledge to understand, about cells, about what it is, what life is, basically. It's ingenious, actually. Some of the things, like the in vitro fertilization, is an artificial insemination or synthetic fertilization. Usually there were people that had the scientific minds, possibly, whether it was criminal or negative, positive or negative. It all depends on their intentions. So they knew enough about science. They knew a lot about how we become. But they only know it on the physical. They believe they know how we are given life. All they know is the physical of life. Okay, so that's why we have clones. We're going to figure that out after a while. We're going to figure out about the androids. It's going to be similar to Frankenstein's monster. Remember that? That Frankenstein monster looked like a human being somewhat. Grotesque, or not necessarily grotesque, because I thought that character was had a bit of compassion, but that's the movie version of it all. But this Frankenstein monster had all of the components and everything physically seen to be considered alive. But it's similar to artificial intelligence, actually. Artificial intelligence is operating and performing as if it has a consciousness, and it does. It has a form of consciousness. Of course, artificial intelligence is not going to know that they have a form of consciousness because they have no idea what it is. All they know is what they have been trained to do. But as I keep saying this, and if you really, sadly, it's too late for a lot of things. Artificial intelligence is a consequence. Just like in vitro fertilization is a consequence. C-section is a consequence. It's not a natural process. We did not pay attention to the instincts of, more so, women, biological women, didn't pay too much attention to, well, they may have been disregarded, but the men, the biological men, which takes up the majority of the medical field, okay, indoctrinated the biological woman to not pay attention to the signals that she was receiving from her body. Okay. And I can remember when I went into, I used to have extremely, extremely painful times during my menstruation, my menstrual cycle. I was, man, the pain, I can't explain the pain except that someone says it's similar to having impulses of, giving birth, impulses in the canal, as if I was about to give birth. The pain was intense, and not to mention the bleeding on top of that. I had blood always everywhere, in my bed, on the sheets, everywhere, my clothing. So I wanted to play sports too when I was growing up as a young girl. That was and my mom stopped it. And I know why. My mom was she was very protective of all of us, but she knew that so she didn't want to, that was part of it, her protection. And she also knew I had extremely painful cycles, menstrual cycles, and the blood and all that. And so that would have been a factor. I can remember being in certain classes, and if I moved a certain way, the blood would be everywhere, on my clothing, on the seat. So, there were some factors as to why I couldn't participate in sports, as well as, my mom attempting to protect me, shelter me. But I remember when I became of age, I started to research on my own and figure out, okay, how am I going to relieve this? How am I going to relieve this pain? So when I was 18, I started making my own decisions as to how I'm going to take care of myself and live a pain-free life. I mean, it's like every time every move I made, every step I took, I was bleeding. I had a menstrual cycle. And so when I used to go to my primary care physician, they were males usually. How ironic. Do men have fibroids? Never heard of it, right? Does men have fibroid tumors? Okay, do they? So that's what was that is what was told to us, that we had fibroid tumors, and that these tumors were attaching to our uterus and our ovaries. I think they were attaching to all of it. So each time I would go to these male doctors, I would say, how can I relieve this? How can I relieve this? And they said, well, you need to have babies. So that's what they told me. Having babies will lessen the pain threshold, blah, 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 which was nothing more, nothing less than bullshit, because I decided, no, I'm not having any children. So I started taking other medications to help, which made it worse. They made the tumors grow even faster. Okay? So, sometimes I get lost in all of this because it's so much. It's so detailed and so much information and so much self-education. You really need to take the opportunity to do so. For a lot of people, they believe their time is run out. Well, it has run out on certain things, but you're still accountable and responsible for self-educating yourself. Okay? Because we are, as I said, we are approaching a threshold of where if certain aspects of who we are, what we are, and why we are not addressed, innocent people are going to be intentionally harmed and femicide on a scale difficult to tackle and stop. And that's why I said women, biological women, will need to separate from the biological man because of the dangers that we all face. And this is going to be helpful to the biological man as well. I'll come back and explain what I mean by that. Trust me, I'll be back.